My name is Jay Edwards here with Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm. Remember that the answers given on this show do not constitute legal advice and do not create an attorney-client relationship. For legal advice, you can call the office anytime at 1-800-DeWitt-Law or interact with the show simply by sending us an email, and we'll get it here and get your question on the air. You can send it to ask@dewittlaw.com. That's ASK at DeWittLaw.com, or you can also call and leave a voicemail. We'll get to one of those today as well at 407-53-MOSES. That's 407-53-MOSES. Every Sunday morning right here, 10 a.m., you'll learn how Florida's legal issues affect you with your host, Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm. Mo will answer your questions to discuss the latest legal issues affecting the citizens here of Central Florida. Easy for me to say. It's this cooler.
Just rolls right off the tongue.
It's the cooler temperatures, I think, that are messing me up.
That'll do it to you. That'll do it to you.
This tiny little cold front that we get. All right. So last week we started talking a little bit about some special legislature that was going through about citizens insurance and
insurance reform overall. So they had to have another special session to discuss homeowners insurance in the state of Florida, which, as we've talked about many times, has been quite an issue in the state of Florida. So, many people out there have either had to switch to the state-backed citizens insurance, or their rates have gone up tremendously, or maybe both, frankly.
Right.
So, it's become a real problem in the state of Florida. I think our rates here have risen, it's like 43% on average.
That's insane.
Which is much higher than the national average, needless to say.
Well, and it doesn't help having 2 hurricanes here just recently, right?
That certainly doesn't help at all. So they're trying to figure out what to do here. Now, we'll kind of talk about what they've done in the legislature and how that may affect you. And then whether, we think rates are going to go down or not. Because I can tell you right off the bat, the one thing that's not included in this law that's been passed is any sort of guaranteed rate reduction. And, in my experience at least, and, maybe somebody else out there has a different experience. I haven't heard from anyone yet who does. But insurance rates historically only go one way, and that's up. So even though they passed this legislation, which is supposed to curb rates or reduce rates, hopefully, there's nothing in there that guarantees it.
Okay.
And so that's the big criticism of this bill. So let's talk about what it does, basically. Okay. So we've talked about assignment of benefits before. So an assignment of benefit, and it used to be used a lot for roof claims, basically. It would be where, hey, you had hurricane damage to your roof or whatever you had. Roofer comes around and says, hey, sign this paperwork. You're signing basically me the claim. I'll put a new roof on your house. I'll go after the insurance company to get it paid for and fixed, and it'll all be handled. If they deny it, then we'll go after them for attorney's fees and so on and so forth. And, as we've discussed, that's been kind of taken advantage of by the industry as a whole, probably, or a lot of people would argue that it was. And so, they've eliminated that altogether. So there's no longer assignment of benefits in Florida. You can't do it. You can't sign over your claim to a third party to handle it for you. Now you have to handle it yourself.
Okay.
So the idea there basically is it's basically going to shut down that industry of the roofers who come to your door and say, hey, I can get you a free roof. Just sign this paperwork.
Right. Okay.
So, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's not. I'm sure on one side they'd argue, hey, it's just much easier for the consumer to hand it off to a third party who deals with it all the time. The insurance industry would obviously argue, hey, that's what's caused this increase of rates because these people are just going around saying, hey, everybody can get a free roof. And as we know, there's no such thing as free. You either pay for it now and you pay for, or you pay for it later. And now we're paying for it later.
Yep.
So the other big change, and this change is very controversial and really could impact consumers. But, before in the state of Florida, if you filed a claim with your insurance company and they denied it, and then you sued them and you ultimately got them to pay out on that claim, and I'm oversimplifying here, of course, but you could get them to pay your attorney's fees, which basically meant you could approach an attorney and they would take the case without you having to come out of pocket and pay, a $5,000 or $10,000 retainer or whatever it was to go after the insurance company.
Right.
That's eliminated. So now, if you want to sue your insurance company, you have to pay for it. Either the money comes out of the claim, out of the actual money you get from them, or you're going to have to pay for it up front and pay hourly. So it's no longer a situation where your attorney gets reimbursed for their time from the insurance company if they win.
This is now your out-of-pocket expense.
Yeah, and so a lot of consumer advocates are saying, well, this is horrible. It basically eliminates the consumer's power to go to court and puts all the cards in the hands of the insurance company, which in many ways they're right. I mean, the insurance company has an army of attorneys, and not only do they now have an army of attorneys, they have an army of attorneys who can pepper and pound the other side with no potential recourse. Essentially, yeah, you can get your claim paid eventually, but that's just going to be based on the value of the claim.
Right.
So they may make you spend $30,000-$50,000 in attorney's fees because they can just pepper you, and then hey, yeah, we'll pay your $20,000 claim, but now you're still upside down.
Upside down. Yeah, man.
So yeah, I think that's probably one of the, in my opinion, most difficult pills to swallow in this legislation. I understand why they did it, but what bothers me, frankly, is that they've taken away all the consumer's power, but they didn't benefit the consumer at all because we didn't get any sort of guaranteed rate reduction. And so, I've talked about this openly. My rates have tripled over the last year, and literally within 12 months they tripled. And they're not going to go down. Even though they have this legislation, which will reduce the amount of claims that they're going to have to pay out. Certainly, they're no longer have to pay out attorney's fees, for that's millions, if not billions of dollars in savings there to them.
Right.
But they're not going to pass that on to the consumer. It's just going to make them more profitable.
Of course, and that's what they're in business for.
Right. So, I kind of wish, there was a legislator who kind of stood up and against the insurance company here and said, look, I understand these claims have been abused over the time, or potentially, arguably, have been abused. And, if we're going to grant all this stuff to you, guarantee the citizens of the state of Florida 20% rate reduction or over time or something in there. But this is really a one-way bill, which I think is kind of concerning when you have a bill that favors big insurance like this.
Right.
I'm sure people are going to call in and disagree with me and say, hey, we needed insurance companies to come back to the state of Florida. We needed, the people have been abusing the system, yada, yada. Oh, you're an attorney, which, by the way, I don't handle these kinds of claims, so I really have no dog in this fight at all.
Right.
I'm just kind of giving you my opinion. I just really wish that there was a provision in there that said, hey, we're going to reduce rates in the state of Florida. And it's not there. So,
and it seems like, yes, there are a few bad apples that were the roofers that came to the door. Like I told you, I had a 2-week-old roof, and a guy came to my house, knock on the door, tell me he could get me a new roof. I'm like, look at my roof. It's 2 weeks old, man. So you have those, but I also feel like with the insurance companies too, because I had severe damage to my roof from a storm.
Right.
And my insurance company wanted to they cut me a check for like $100 to fix it.
Yeah.
After my $1,000 deductible or whatever, they get $100. I'm like, well, what is that going to do?
Well, I always kind of describe this type of legislation as a pendulum, right? Because when Hurricane Andrew hit Miami, people had that problem.
Right.
They had insurance, but the insurance company was paying them pennies on the dollar. They wouldn't pay the claims, so on and so forth. And that's why this prior legislation got passed, because the pendulum then swayed over to the consumer side, because the consumers were so pissed off with the insurance companies for the way they were treated, right?
Right.
Then people kind of figured out how to manipulate that legislation. You had these bad apples out there. And so now the pendulum's swinging back to the other extreme, essentially. And ultimately, when that happens, the consumer gets hurt. So, you wish there was kind of a more fair and balanced legislation that would be passed here, that would ultimately benefit the consumer in some way. Even if, when you're stripping their rights like this, at least give us a rate reduction, right?
Because your hands are tied. What are you
they
gonna do?
they really are tied now. Now, the only thing that they did that arguably benefits the consumer is they reduce the amount of time the insurance company has to respond to the claim. That just means they're going to deny your claim faster. But
simply put,
yeah, but they did reduce that. They also reduced the amount of time you have to sue the insurance company. They're trying to put in an arbitration provision versus litigation, which then they're saying if you elect that will reduce your rates. Ultimately, we'll see on that. And then they're doing some stuff with Citizens, where basically if you have another insurance company that will give you a rate within about 20% of your current rate, you have to go with them. You're basically kicked off Citizens Insurance. Because as we've talked about before, last time we checked it on the show I think it was 5,500 people a week in the state of Florida were signing up with Citizens Insurance.
Yeah.
Which that's just not sustainable.
No.
The state, for those who don't know, Citizens is a state-backed insurance plan. It's backed by the state of Florida.
That's who I had until recently.
Yeah, and that's who we had on our old house after our roof hit 10 years old, and they immediately dropped us, and the only people that would pick us up was Citizens Insurance, which that got changed. That legislation got changed under the last special session. So I think they increased it to 15 years now. But yeah, you can't have that many people on one insurance company, because if there's a big event, a big hurricane that comes in, it's going to really impact them.
Ian, Nicole, that's,
that's,
how do you pay all that out for one company?
Yeah. So, it's not sustainable to have everybody on the state-backed insurance. We do need to encourage private insurance companies to come into the state of Florida to be here. And ultimately, when you have more choices, in the market, that's typically better for the market, right? So when everybody's leaving the market, that indicates there's a problem, which is what they're trying to fix here.
Right.
And so they've definitely leaned very heavily towards the insurance companies in their favor, ultimately, arguably, to try to get them to return to the state of Florida so that there's more choices in the state of Florida.
Well, friendly competition never hurt anybody, right?
Right. We just wish that maybe there was some rate reductions built into this.
That would be nice.
So,
listen, I will say that I feel like there is a light at the end of the tunnel, because as somebody that was on Citizens, because that's the only people that would write me with my house, they came out, and I think I've mentioned this before. I ended up, I do have a new roof on my home now, but that's all. It's still the same house. Ended up sending some sort of inspector out to check the overall condition of the home. And now I qualified for a different insurance company. Citizens got rid of me, gave me to a different company, and my rates actually went down,
which is fantastic.
It was only, it's probably $150, $200 a year, but it's still
take what you can get. At least it's not going the other way.
It's down. And like you said, that's so unheard of.
Yeah. Well, especially in today's market.
Right.
And so, the experts on this are basically saying, at the end of the day, all these changes are obviously not very consumer friendly, but they're basically saying, hopefully the best case scenario is that rates stay the same, that they don't continue to increase. Now, of course, like I've said many times, the big criticism here is that there's nothing built in to put caps on rates. There's nothing guaranteeing rates are going to stay the same. There's nothing guaranteeing that rates are going to go down, but they're saying hopefully they stay the same, which is kind of funny, because under the last legislative session, they were saying, well, hopefully this will reduce rates.
Right.
And that was one of the big arguments was, well, put in there that you guarantee to reduce rates by 10% or 20% or whatever they were arguing for. And they said, no, it'll just naturally happen. And I haven't seen that.
No.
So hopefully they'll at least stay the same. And then the other big thing is that they don't want further carriers to flee the state. They're trying to get people to actually stay in the state of Florida. So we'll see what happens with that. Only time will tell. I think, the experts are really saying we're going to have to wait 2 to 3 years to see kind of how this affects things.
That was my next question is there a timetable?
Yeah, that's just kind of speculation. I think we will see over time, now that this is very pro-insurance. I don't think anyone can argue with me that this bill is pro-insurance. We'll see carriers stay in the state of Florida. We may see some return to the state of Florida. But how will that affect our rates? Will those rates go down? Obviously, there's more competition. Maybe they will. But ultimately, like I've said before, I've never really seen historically over time, insurance rates always kind of go up. So once we see these big jumps and they're getting the money for it, typically it doesn't come down that much.
Gonna stay there or come down just a little bit.
You give a $50 discount and call it a day.
Right. Just so they can say we did come down. Of course, look at that. 1%. Yep. All right. Well, we're going to get to your emails and your voicemails here and your calls coming up in just a few minutes. If you do have a question for Mo and you would like to get some legal advice, you can send an email to ask@dewittlaw.com. That's ask@dewittlaw.com. Or we're going to play one of those voicemails too. If it's easier for you, just want to leave a voicemail. If you call 407-53-MOSES, 407-53-MOSES. You can leave a voicemail right there. Or for legal advice, if you just want to call and it's not something that you want to put out on the air and you need some guidance, you need some legal advice, you can call the DeWitt Law Firm anytime. Give the office a call at 1-800-DeWitt Law, spelled DEWITT, 1-800-DeWitt Law. So we'll get to your questions affecting the citizens of Central Florida coming up here in just a few minutes. You are listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. Welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. My name is Jay Edwards, here with Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm. We're taking your calls. and your questions, sending them to ask@dewittlaw.com. That's ask@dewittlaw.com. Or you can also call and leave a voicemail, 407-53-MOSES. Let's go ahead and get to some of your questions that you have for Mo so he can give you some legal advice. This is Mo. I'm set to marry next year from a 5-year relationship.
Okay.
I have owned my home for 12 years while I was still single. As we make plans for our marriage, I had a question as to whether or not the home that I purchased 7 years before we met would be at risk should an unfortunate split or marriage ever happen in the state of Florida. My question is, would a prenup agreement be necessary for a situation like this, or would I be protected since the house purchase was made on me and my own, and it's only my name that's on the paperwork?
So, that's one of the common misconceptions I think people have is, if you own a home premarital, obviously it is a premarital asset.
Mm-hmm.
But there's what we call the CAW formula in the state of Florida, and that's based on the case law, which was CAW versus CAW. It was a divorce case that ultimately, was appealed and kind of went up the chain. I think it ultimately went to the Florida Supreme Court. And so what that basically says is, yes, the home is premarital, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a non-marital asset. But any increase in the equity that occurs during the marriage becomes marital. So let's say he had purchased the home for $200,000, and let's just, for easy math purposes, say it's still worth $200,000 on the day they got married. But by the time they get divorced, it's increased to $300,000. So that $100,000 in the increase in equity is subject to equitable distribution in a divorce. So she could be entitled to $50,000 from that.
Gotcha.
And of course, I'm oversimplifying here a bit, but that's generally the rule. Now, a prenuptial agreement could help you avoid that. So a prenuptial agreement is just a contract, really, where you're defining each party's rights and responsibilities as far as what they would get in the event that there is a divorce. And you can basically do almost anything in that as long as, number one, it's not illegal, and two, it doesn't affect children. So you can't do things like child support or time sharing, really, in a prenuptial agreement. But otherwise, you can pretty much do whatever you want. And so here you could do a prenuptial agreement that basically just says, hey, the house is purchased prior to the marriage, the home and any increase in equity of the home would become mine. And so you may have to define how the mortgage is going to continue to get paid. Is he going to continue to pay it out of his separate funds?
Right.
Is it okay if it's paid out of marital funds? There's some other aspects there that have to be considered. But if you are concerned about that, and a lot of times in this type of situation, the other spouse will say, yeah, that was your home. I don't want anything to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure, I'll sign a prenuptial agreement. Now, one piece of advice, if they say that now, have them sign the prenuptial agreement, because when you get to the divorce, they're not going to be as friendly, in my experience. So yeah, you can certainly do a prenuptial agreement for that. Now, I think he said he was getting married mid 2023, if I remember correctly, somewhere around there.
Yep.
So you want to make sure that you do a prenuptial agreement with enough advanced notice to the other party, because as we've talked about before, whenever we're drafting a prenuptial agreement, one of the biggest things we have to consider is how could this possibly be challenged? And one of the most common ways to challenge a prenuptial agreement is argue that you were under duress when it was signed. And you do that by saying, hey, this person gave it to me the night before the wedding, the day before the wedding, the week of the wedding, whatever it may be. We've paid all these vendors. I, paid $20,000 for the wedding. My family was on their way.
I had no option.
I had no option but to sign it.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that you do it well in advance of the wedding to eliminate that possibility. And there's some other things that you want to do, like give the other side the opportunity to have it reviewed by an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
As we've discussed before, when we draft prenuptial agreements, we can only represent one side because, the interests don't necessarily align. So each side has to have the opportunity to get their own legal advice. They don't actually have to hire an attorney, but you have to make sure that they have the opportunity to hire an attorney if they want to do so.
Don't wait until the last minute.
Don't wait until the last
Get it
minute.
done.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So it'll make everything go a lot smoother if you do it that way.
Perfect. All right. So we got some more of your questions and emails coming up in just a few minutes, as well as our Mo Pro Tip of the Week coming up a little bit later on in the hour. You are listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk. Keep sending those questions in. We love getting to them. Email us at askask@dewittlaw.com. You can leave a voicemail, 407-53-MOSES. Also, the number, if you do need legal advice and it's not something you want to put out over the air, you can always call for legal advice anytime here at the DeWitt Law Firm at 1-800-DeWitt-Law. That's 1-800-DeWitt-Law. More of your questions and answers coming up right here. It's the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk.
So I want to show you something. Here, come closer. See this letter here? This letter offered for our client to settle for $10,000 back in May of 2021. We just got this client $200,000 for that same accident. He didn't want to take the $10,000, and rightfully so, because the insurance company was offering him pennies on the dollar. Oftentimes, clients get impatient, but in this case, it was worth the wait and worth to fight the insurance company to get what he deserved. Injured on the go? Just call Mo.
Welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk, here with Mo DeWitt of the DeWitt Law Firm. If you've got a question, send it to ask@dewittlaw.com or by calling 407-53-MOSES. All right, you got this story about this doctor.
Yeah, I ran across this. The Florida bar actually pushed out this article, and it was about a Florida medical marijuana doctor who's been fighting against the state of Florida, basically, who's been trying to pull his license for, I think, about 5 years now, or basically whenever the legislation, shortly after the legislation was passed that allowed medical marijuana in the state of Florida. And it was a case that a lot of doctors were obviously watching, because what happened was the state of Florida sent 2 undercover investigators into this doctor's office. And the undercover investigators posed as patients and tried to get a prescription for medical marijuana. And ultimately, this doctor wrote them one. But the state of Florida said he didn't do a physical examination. So what he did was the patients came in and they had falsified medical records. They also had a note from another doctor, I believe, or it was a fake doctor,
Right.
that said that they had PTSD. The fake patients said that they were they'd served in Afghanistan and had PTSD from that, and so on and so forth. And the doctor sat down with the patients and spoke with them, asked them questions, and went through their medical history and their medical records based on what was presented. Well, the state of Florida argued that he had to do a physical exam.
So not just like your background history.
Right. And so, based on that, and based that he wrote medical marijuana prescriptions for these 2 patients, ultimately the state of Florida tried to pull his medical license, permanently revoke his medical license. And he's been fighting the state of Florida for quite a few years now. And ultimately he just prevailed. The court finally ruled, and the Department of Health, Florida Department of Health Board finally ruled that there's nothing in the statute that requires an actual physical examination. Looking through the records, interviewing the patient, talking with the patient, especially when you're alleging something like post-traumatic stress disorder. I don't really know how a physical examination would actually substantiate that anyways. But it's a little scary to think that these investigators went into the office, blatantly lied to the doctor.
Right.
Maybe you could argue that he had some obligation to check up on these medical records that were brought in and verify them. I don't know if there is an obligation or not in the state of Florida for that. But when they're coming in, they're lying, they're saying these are their symptoms, so on and so forth. And then ultimately they try to pull the guy's medical license for it. And it really has affected him and affected his practice.
Yeah.
Walmart would no longer take prescriptions from him, so his patients couldn't go to Walmart for their prescriptions. His medical practice really got hurt from it. The business
Tarnish his name, right?
Absolutely. His comment was, I feel somewhat vindicated, but I've also, had a lot of sleepless nights over the last 5 years fighting these people, and who knows how much money it cost them. So they do plan on going after them going after the state and requesting attorney's fees at the very least. But I thought it was an interesting story of something that's, been relatively new in the state of Florida with the legalization of medical marijuana. And obviously doctors throughout the state have been watching this, because when these new laws get passed like that, and, sometimes the early adopters of the doctors who are writing these prescriptions are the ones who have to kind of fight this to determine, hey, what are the boundaries here, especially when the statute doesn't define it. And that's a lot of times when the legislature does a bad job at writing a statute and it's not clear. Here they said it was clear. But when it's not clear, then ultimately it ends up in the courts for the courts to decipher that statute and interpret it and try to determine the statutory interpretation. So, sometimes innocent bystanders may get caught in that, whether it's this case or another case.
Right.
It just takes time to go through the court system, and ultimately that has to be worked out that way. So I thought it was an interesting example of that.
Poor guy kind of drugged through that. What's crazy, that's kind of what my wife does for a living. She interviews patients in the mental health field, but she goes through their background and their history and what's the trauma that, that type of thing.
Yeah.
There's no physical exam. Granted, it's not for a medical marijuana license or anything like that.
But it's still an odd argument.
It is.
Especially now with the development of telemedicine, and a lot of things have gone to telemedicine.
Right.
And I know telemedicine's still limited, but it's an interesting argument that there has to be some sort of physical examination. And of course, then if there was a requirement for physical examination, what is enough of a physical examination?
Right.
So
yeah, it's not like they came in for extreme back pain or something like that. Okay, understandable.
Right. And then you say, okay, stretch this way. How's the pain feel? How's the pain feel with, so on and so forth. But
interesting. Well, I guess.
It is, it is somewhat interesting. I guess the argument on the other side would be, you don't want patients going in and just easily being able to lie to get, drugs of some kind. I think that was part of the problem with the opioid epidemic, obviously, is everybody was saying, oh, this pain or that pain. Sometimes it may have been legitimate. Sometimes maybe it wasn't. But pain is also very hard to verify sometimes. We deal with this in car accident cases all the time where, the person says, well, I'm in significant pain. And they hire some expert that says, oh, yeah, you shouldn't be in any pain at all. And they're going, well, I can't even pick up my 3-year-old child anymore because it causes so much pain. They go, well, that wasn't caused by the accident. And you go, well, what was it caused by then? There was no other injury here,
right, yeah.
So always two sides to every argument, I suppose.
Of course. All right, so let's get to this question from Mike. I'll try and read it as quickly as I can, but this is pretty interesting. Wants to know, last night, he said, if you can help me out with a traffic ticket. Last night, there was a road rage incident with this dude who sped up when I tried to pass him. I sped up. I made it in front of him. He then flew up flashing his brights, so I brake checked him. He followed.
Not a good idea.
No, he followed me for a half a mile to a right turn. Then after the turn, flew by me, cut me off, and hit me with his rear quarter on my front quarter. I told the police all the details, including the brake check, and I have the dash cam. I'm guessing he got a ticket, but I did too for the brake check. So the officer said I can either pay the ticket and accept the points or bring it to court, and 9 out of 10 it would be dismissed because no witnesses. He didn't say anything regarding the video. This guy says, I don't have any points now, and this is my first ticket aside from an expired tag or maybe a parking ticket. The ticket's $166. I don't know what's more cost effective. I'm not really worried about the points.
Well, I'm not a ticket attorney, but I would assume it's probably going to cost you at least $100, maybe a couple $100 to hire an attorney to fight the ticket if you wanted to go that route. You could certainly elect on your own to fight the ticket, to have a court date. And then they'd have to show up with some sort of witness to verify the brake check, quote unquote. Now, I would be worried about the points. He says he's not worried about them, but that could lead to increasing your insurance rates and some other things, as well as if you do happen to get other tickets, there can be further adverse consequences. So, I would look into hiring a traffic attorney or taking the ticket to court if you want to do so. If you're concerned about the points, sometimes you can also ask. Basically for the points to be waived and you just pay the ticket. And depending, he said he hasn't had any tickets before, so he probably has a pretty clean driving history.
Right.
Sometimes the court will allow that if you are worried about the points. I know he says it's not, but you don't want
other people are.
Yeah. I'm worried about the points for you.
I wouldn't want them.
Yeah. So, those are your options, whether it's worth it to you or not. That's really a personal decision. In the future, don't brake check people. But is what it is.
I'm sure your insurance company's not going to love the fact that you brake check somebody either.
Right. If you're dealing with someone with road rage, you just kind of want to get away from them and get out of the way as much as possible.
Right.
There's no reason to start fights out there on the road. I'm sure many of us have experienced that before, and you don't want to escalate the situation by any means.
Right. All right, let's get to a custody question here. This is from Damon. He says, I have a friend that's from Michigan, living but not a resident of Florida, with a child with her baby daddy also living here and not a resident of Florida. She needs a lawyer for custody. She's the full-time parent and provider. He's not involved and has had the child by herself for a year. She wants to get custody and everything legalized, and I'm directing her to you if you handle this kind of stuff. And if not, can you point me in the right direction or give me some advice?
Sure. So, we handle, paternity cases, is what it's called, custody cases, all
Right.
the time. So it sounds like she's lived in the state of Florida for about a year now with the child, which is important because under the UCCJEA, you have to live in the state of Florida for 6 months or longer for the court to have jurisdiction over the child, to be able to bring the case here, essentially.
Okay.
So from what I'm gathering kind of from the email, there hasn't been a prior custody case. So you'd want to file the case in the state of Florida, then you have to have the other party serve with that case. Now, depending on they could try to move it back to Michigan. There's often jurisdiction disputes, but more often than not, since the child's lived here for more than 6 months, jurisdiction would probably reside in the state of Florida. And then I don't know what the father's involvement has been at all, if there's been any sort of time sharing, been any sort of custody, if he's had any involvement. But then typically you have to work out a long distance parenting plan, since one parent presumably resides in Michigan and one parent resides here in Florida.
Mm-hmm.
And then you just go from there. It goes to the court. You have to determine the parenting plan, the time sharing or custody schedule, as well as child support is going to be part of that as well. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
This one says, "Hey Mo, I was pulled over on I-95. The police officer said that he was pacing me for about 3 or 4 miles. Did not have radar gun, but said that he was pacing me and staying up with me, and I was exceeding the speed limit and got a ticket for failure to obey the posted speed limit sign, as opposed to necessarily a speeding ticket.
Yep.
Will that hold up in a court of law, pacing, or do I have a fight?"
Typically pacing is upheld in a court of law. Typically, as long as they do it properly and they're trained properly in it, they can, follow you and pace you and see how fast you're going, in lieu of radar. So yeah, I mean, they can write you a ticket, and typically, as long as it's done properly, it can be upheld by a court of law. So don't speed.
Yeah, and know that there's a car on your tail for the last 3 or 4 miles.
Also, probably shows you weren't paying much attention. But
Exactly. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
This is a me one, as we're sitting here overlooking the downtown Orlando skyline.
Sure.
Go to pay at a parking meter. You're going to a Broadway
Right.
show or a game or something like that, and you go to pay, and it says that the credit card machine or whatever is not working. And this has truly happened to me before, where you look
This happened to me before too, actually.
you look around for an attendant, you don't see anybody,
Yeah.
and you risk it, and then you come back and you got that green envelope on your windshield.
Mm-hmm.
Can you get out of that because it wasn't working, or is it your responsibility to move your car?
So, I mean, I've personally had this happen to me before, and I think I showed them that it wasn't working. Maybe I had taken a picture of it or something like that I tried to pay.
Right.
And, there was no other parking spots in that area. And I think you have like 14 days to challenge, or maybe it's 10 days, something like that. And they reversed it without any argument. I just said, hey, it wasn't working. Maybe I sent them a picture of it as well, and they took the fine off. So
I shouldn't have just paid mine.
I mean, you're always risking it, but
I mean, this was years ago.
Yeah.
But I was just sitting here looking at the downtown skyline made me think of that, because I'm sure that they hear everything. Like, you put it on my windshield, and the crazy wind that day must have blown it off. I had no idea that it was even there.
Right. Now, I mean, sometimes when they're not operable, they will put that kind of bag over it and lock it and say, no parking inoperable or something like that.
Right.
And obviously, if you park there, then you're going to be subject to a ticket. But if you pull in the spot, you try to pay, it's not working. Maybe I guess they don't take quarters anymore, but they used to. You put the quarters in there, and
Right.
It just doesn't register for whatever reason. I think you have an argument there that you shouldn't have to pay the ticket. In my case, it worked. Maybe in your case, it won't, but it worked for me.
Yeah, I mean, I love being able to put a couple dollar bills or some quarters in there, just because sometimes I feel like those machines, like, they put skimmers and things like that. I'm like, how trustworthy are these parking lot machines?
I never even thought about the skimmers on that. I wonder if that's become a problem at all. I don't know.
Right.
Obviously, it has on gas pumps.
Yeah.
I hope we're not giving people ideas to.
I hope not.
But hopefully they check for that. I mean, maybe they do, but there's a lot of parking meters out there, certainly. So it'd be hard to check them all.
Absolutely. All right. So we've learned, don't speed.
Don't speed.
And pay for your parking.
Pay for your parking tickets. Don't brake check people. Just stop committing crimes, people. Come on.
Right. See, there's your Mo Pro tip of the week. We haven't even gotten to it yet. You already did it. Mo, best way for somebody to reach out if they do need some legal advice and they don't want to do it necessarily, or to get more information on the DeWitt Law Firm.
Sure. So, I mean, if you want to schedule a consultation, you can always call the office, 1-800-DeWitt-Law. That's 1-800-339-4885. But if you want to participate in the show, if you just have a simple question, that's what we're here for. You can always email us, ask@dewittlaw.com, or give us a call, leave us a voicemail, 407-53-MOSES, 407-536-6737. And lastly, we haven't plugged it this week, but we have the divorce book, DeWitt's Divorce Guide. which you can, of course, download a copy at DeWittDivorce.com if you'd like a free copy. Or if you want us to mail you one, just email us at ask@DeWittLaw.com. Make sure you give us your address. I had somebody just say, please send me the copy of the book. And well, that's great, but where would you like me to send it? So please include the address so I know where to send it, and we'll mail out a copy for you.
Perfect. There you go. All right. We will get to another one of your questions, plus our Mo Pro Tip of the Week coming up next. You are listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk.
Someone ran a stop sign about 50 miles an hour and hit my truck basically head on, and it caused a lot of damage to the vehicle, but also hurt me as well. The insurance company reached out like, hey, we'll make this all go away if you just, sign this and take this money. And even though that was my first accident, I knew that that wasn't the way it should have went. And that's when I decided to call Mo.
So after the accident, the insurance company approached Mark and tried to give him $1,000 to waive all rights to bring a claim. Fortunately, he was suspicious and knew better.
So it was no, if you have a question, just call me at my office or email me here. And I really enjoyed that.
Ultimately, in this case, we were able to recover $110,000 from Mark's injuries.
He's funny, he's approachable, but he also knows what he's doing. And if I knew anyone who's injured and needed a lawyer, I would definitely recommend DeWitt Law Firm. If you're injured on the go, just call Mo.
Mark's a great guy, and I'm so happy that we were able to help him with his accident case.
Welcome back to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's News and Talk. For legal advice, get your questions on the air with us. Ask at DeWittLaw.com or by calling 407-53 Moses. You can leave a voicemail right there. All right, Mo, with the holidays right around the corner, Thanksgiving's already passed, but here we are next week, and next weekend is Christmas.
Snuck right up on us.
So when it comes to divorce, say this is somebody's first Christmas, and the other spouse has been awarded, custody
or
of the
time
kids,
sharing,
and they get the kid on Christmas, and the dad or the mom was like, this is my first Christmas without my kids. Is there anything that you can do as a parent to not necessarily demand, but be like, listen, I want my kids for 6 hours that day. You can have them the other 18. How does that work when it comes to custody and the holidays?
So, that's part of the parenting plan that you did as part of any divorce or, paternity action, essentially. And the parenting plan controls the rights and responsibilities when it comes to the kids.
Okay.
And part of the parenting plan is going to be a holiday schedule. And usually you're going to carve out, Christmas and Christmas Eve or winter break in that parenting plan. And so, of course, the parents can always agree and agree otherwise, but if they can't agree, then you're stuck with what's in the parenting plan.
Okay.
So if it says that mom has Christmas this year and you have Christmas next year, and you can't agree otherwise, that's what you're stuck with. But what I will say is, I've never met a child who is going to argue with having 2 Christmases or having 2 birthday parties. So just because you don't have actual Christmas doesn't mean you can't celebrate Christmas with them. And so, when you go through a divorce, I think you have to kind of celebrate the little wins. So I was talking to a former client the other day, and he was saying, when he didn't cook, as a parent, before the divorce, his wife always cooked dinner for the kids. And, the first time that he kind of cooked a pot roast, like a big meal, and the kids just devoured it.
Right.
Was kind of one of the first really proud moments he had after the divorce, because it's a little win.
Sure,
It's hey, we're moving in the right direction here. I can do this. I can, have a family, even though we're split up. We can still have a successful family life and have a good time together.
Mm-hmm.
And I can make sure these kids are happy, healthy, and loved. And so with Christmas, it's no different. You can still do the same thing, and maybe you start new traditions. Maybe you start the tradition of, hey, on the 23rd, we're gonna go out to eat for a big meal, or I'm gonna cook a big meal, or we're gonna go read Christmas stories, or whatever your tradition is, you know. But people, one of the things parents often argue is, I want the kids on their birthday. I go, first of all, most of the time your kids are gonna be in school on their birthday anyways, but no kid's gonna argue with having 2 birthday parties. You can always do something special for them. And any holiday is really no different. It doesn't have to be on the actual holiday. There's no reason you can't have your own celebration, before Christmas if you don't have Christmas this year. and still have some sort of special involvement with them. It's not really the day that matters. It's spending time with your family and sharing those moments with them.
Creating memories.
Exactly.
And you bring up a good point too, is chances are if mom has the kids on Christmas, there's a good chance probably dad's got them Christmas Eve. So you can still have that nice, that celebration.
And then again, that's something, if you're contemplating a divorce or going through a divorce, that you want to kind of really think out, because at the end of the day, there's a million ways to do a parenting plan, a million ways to do a holiday time sharing schedule.
Right.
But it really boils down to what's best for you. So like some families are used to traveling for Christmas. So there we usually split up the winter break where, one parent has the beginning half of winter break, the other parent has the second half of winter break, so that they could both travel with the kids if they wanted to.
Right. Yeah.
Other parents always stay in town for Christmas break. So there you would probably say, okay, well, one parent's going to have Christmas Eve, and then, 8 o'clock Christmas Eve or 6 o'clock, whatever time you guys choose, they're going to go to the other parent. You just want to think through those decisions and how they're actually going to affect people. I know sometimes you kind of have the blinders on when you're going through a divorce. It's a dark time and you're just saying, I just want this done with. I just want to sign off on it. And that's where you get into trouble. So that's why you really want to think things through.
Well, and I think we could make that kind of our Mo Pro tip of the week. Just kind of think it through if that is something that you're going to go through.
Absolutely. And that's what the divorce book's all about. So pick up a copy, DeWittDivorce.com. You can download a copy right there.
There you have it. Our Mo Pro tip of the week. You're listening to the DeWitt Law Review right here on 107.3 FM and AM 580, Orlando's news and talk. If you didn't have a chance to get in your question this week, you can always send it in to ask@DeWittLaw.com. That's ask@DeWittLaw.com. And for legal advice, you can call the office anytime, 1-800-DeWitt Law. You're listening to the DeWitt Law Review on 107.3 FM and AM